What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So our first story is from Anthropic, and they're announcing this Project Glasswing, an urgent initiative to help secure the world's most critical software. It's powered by their newest frontier model, Claude Mythos, which can find software vulnerabilities better than all but the most skilled humans. So there's a lot to cover on this, but I'm just going to go over the main points, and you can look into it more if you're interested. But basically, they have this new model called Claude Mythos, which is about 10 trillion parameters is what is being reported, which compared to other frontier models, Elon actually said that like Sonnet and Opus are about 500 billion to 1 trillion parameters in their model, and kind of like the early models were about 70 billion to 300 billion was around the realm of what you could find open source, and then you could self-host, like the smaller ones like the 3 billion parameters. But nonetheless, there's been a lot of hype about this Claude Mythos LLM, but it seems to be very overhyped is what I'm hearing. There's a lot of pieces to this, but one of the main pieces as well is that they're not making it public for now. As you can see here, they do not plan to make Mythos preview generally available. Their goal is to deploy Mythos class models safely at scale, and they're giving access to these 16 companies at first, which is Apple, Broadcom, Cisco, CrowdStrike, Google, JP Morgan, Linux Foundation, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Palo Alto Networks. And basically they released a paper that said that they had solved a bunch of vulnerabilities. They found a zero-day vulnerability in like OpenBSD, which is for building Linux, I believe, and also other projects. I think FFmpeg, they shipped like some patches to the project. And Theo made a video where he was like, it's kind of the end of the world. I haven't watched the video yet, but people are responding as if like this is kind of the model that causes psychosis, basically, where people think now everything's done for. But the simplest counter to that is that you just look at the Claude uptime. They're only like 98%, and they've had access to this model internally since like late February. And people did like a deep dive on the paper that they solved, and basically it was kind of like tuned to solve a specific type of vulnerability that they found. I think it was like Firefox related, and they essentially found that if you took out that specific scenario, that specific vulnerability that they were working on, it went from like 150 vulnerabilities that I found to like 10 or something. So I don't have the exact numbers, like you'll have to look into it if you're interested, but this is one of those things where it seems like it's very capable, it seems like it's very ahead of its time, but in terms of results and what we've actually seen, like I wouldn't be too worried, and the hype is obviously going to be higher coming internally from Anthropic than it will be in the reality, and progress moves very slowly, so these things take time to develop, but very interesting nonetheless, and there will be a lot coming from this, I'm sure, moving forward into the future. Okay, next we have a tweet from this guy Alex Sidorenko, which is talking about this config that we talked about previously. So we had covered how Axios had been compromised, but projects like Socket.dev and companies that do like the security analysis of NPM projects found the vulnerability within like 6 minutes after release, so very on top of it, especially for these popular packages. But you can see here, if you're using NPM or using PNPM, you can set the min release age, which is days for NPM, or min release age for PNPM, which uses minutes. And then in this case, you would never be able to download even if the package fits like your package.json caret or whatever, like your version specification. It won't install if it's too early of a release. So pretty interesting, and kind of speaks to the idea like as more software gets developed in the age of AI, that also the security counter responses and tools that we get developed for building with all of this new software and all of these supply chain attacks built in, and all of these supply chain attacks being a possibility, that will kind of even itself out, and the white hats hopefully will win in the end. And there might be some casualties on the way, but we'll get tools like this, and this isn't a new tool, but stuff like this is what's very important for building like these best practice projects, which I think AI really helps enable. Next we have a pretty long but interesting post from Mitchell Hashimoto, who is the founder of Hashicorp, which did like Vault, and they had a few other projects, but it was a very big company, and pretty cool how he named it after himself. But he goes over to the idea of like what is the new era of software bringing with AI, and he's covering like Ghosty, which is a terminal that he's using, and I started using as well because my iTerm was getting super overloaded with memory, especially when I was using the Pi coding agent, which he talks about here, and OhMyPi. But since I switched to Ghosty, like the memory is so much better, like it's really a great product. But he just speaks on like what is it looking like moving into the future of like, basically he's saying like the imports are up, so now like AI is using more libraries than ever, which obviously creates these supply chain attacks and is very dangerous. But also exports are up, which he's saying like new software is being released, so kind of like on both ends, like new software is being imported to glue things together is what he's saying, like the agents are really good at, and also exports are up where a lot of software is being released that people can use. And he's saying the quality bar is lower, but software wasn't that great even before the AI boom, and now there's just more of it coming out. So it's kind of like even if you have a normal distribution of software quality, like just the fact that more software is coming out means that more bad software is coming out, but also more great software is coming out. He says the maintenance burden is lower. I understand what he's saying with this, specifically how he has like this vouch project, which makes it so that people can't commit unless they have like a vouch from an external party. So that's kind of like the contribution issues we talked about, where a lot of these open source projects aren't accepting contributions anymore because there was just so much AI slop. But also it's like now that we're pushing the boundaries of how much software we can deliver and what kind of features we can implement and how easy it is to implement features, it also does kind of increase a maintenance burden and a cognitive overhead burden where you're always making like the most complicated decisions at the human level because everything else that you can outsource to AI has already been outsourced. And basically the takeaway he's saying is that like instead of creating like these all-in-one platforms, now it's kind of like about creating building blocks and encouraging applications or forks on top of it, and kind of speaks to open source. He talks about how like commercialization is also being impacted, which it was already being impacted before with open source, but also in the AI boom, like there's a lot more open source projects, and people believe that you can like recreate your SaaS internally or that companies are going to do that. I personally don't buy it. I really believe in like the sign in with Google experience, which I've talked about before, which is kind of just a analogy for like how easy it is to sign up for a new project. You just want to be able to sign in with Google, connect your credit card, and then you get all of the benefits of a single focus SaaS, which is like they're very on top of the game and they stay ahead on the industry that they're in, and you don't have to worry about maintenance or hosting or any of these things. Okay, next we have a tweet from Theo. It's not really that insightful, but I thought it was very interesting because it speaks to a project that I've always been very interested by, which is he's saying, I want to control agents from my phone. I'm sure you do too. What workflows do you want? Do you have one that works? Tell me all about it. So I'm sure he's working on like a mobile app for T3 codes. I'm not sure if the mobile app for T3 chat ever came out, but I'm assuming it must have for him to even be exploring this, because I feel like he would be focused on the mobile piece for T3 chat before working on T3 codes mobile. But nonetheless, Cursor obviously has their background agents, which was kind of the first where you could go in and you could type into the chat, and same with Claude as well, where you can have it build a PR and a sandbox for you. But personally, I do still like to be able to read the code, even though I use OhMyPy. I'm not using like Cursor right now, which is the best for being able to read your code as it's being written. I always thought like it would be very interesting to have like an IDE on your phone. You know, even before AI, I always wanted that, because you know when you're mobile, you could write code and you don't always need to like see the code run or have a sandbox just to be able to write the code. You know, you can kind of imagine what it's going to do, and then when you get back to your computer, you can execute it and see what actually happened. And then obviously with LLMs, it just makes the autocomplete and makes the like new code so much easier to analyze and add. And then it's like you can kind of just do code review from your phone, you know, where the GitHub UI is horrible for that. And I don't know if there's a much better mobile even code review experience yet, but definitely if I had to predict into the future, if I had to like make an investment, that would definitely be something I would invest in for the future. I don't think people are going to move away from reading the code. I could be wrong. You know, it may be something where it's like with compilers, we've moved away completely from reading like the assembly code that gets written or whatever. But in terms of like the TypeScript that gets written, I feel like personally, like that's still very important to know. And especially like when you're focused on one company, which I believe in a lot, especially in the age of AI, because you can go deep instead of going wide with multiple projects. Just building that mental model of your code can be done from your phone, in my opinion. So pretty interesting. And Mateo, who's a contributor to Node, is saying TMUX plus SSH is all I ever need, which is pretty funny. Tail scale here is an interesting idea. Also, this guy's connecting via SSH, but I feel like you could have a mobile app that's specific for it, especially for the code review piece. Even if you can't write code, you could just prompt it purely. But even then, I feel like if you had like a code writer in your mobile app, you would be able to use like autocomplete and kind of like the original Cursor Copilot kind of tab completion would be really cool for a mobile experience. And then last, we just have this tweet from Startup Archive, which is talking about Brian Armstrong. He did an interview where he said he built Coinbase on nights and weekends while working at Airbnb. And there's a bunch of jokes about this. Like people were saying like Brian Armstrong just says this all the time because he doesn't want to get sued by Airbnb for building it on company time. And he says don't use your company laptop, obviously, or use company hours. It is interesting, you know, I feel like in the AI boom, we talked about in the AI boom, like should you focus on one project? I do think like having a day job and having your night software startup does make a lot of sense. It kind of speaks to like Paul Graham, where he would say like, where his example in his essays from way back in the day, he would say like work on your day job, which is kind of how you pay the bills, and then at night you could work on open source. That was kind of his example, because I guess he would say if you're going to work on a startup, you should fully invest into that time-wise. But I do think it makes sense as well to like have a day job that pays your bills, and then you could have like a night project where you're focused on that. But I just don't think it makes sense to have like one day job and then like 10 night projects, you know? It's like you really want to be focused in the age of AI because you can go deep, you can build these really beautiful code bases, you can have a very defined system and project, and, you know, work on growth and distribution, not just on feature delivery, which I think a lot of software engineers fell into previously. I know a lot of people are talking about distribution and growth these days, especially on Twitter. So that mindset has kind of been shifting in a positive way, in my opinion, but nonetheless, very interesting and curious what people think. And it is cool that, you know, Coinbase, which is such a massive company, was built during nights and weekends, theoretically.